Learn and grow with humility. Open our ears to hear, open our eyes to see, open our hearts to love. May the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, loving God. I have now had my 5th operation over the last few years on my hands. These are the hands that have raised children, grandchildren, with all the menial tasks that need to be done to keep them clean, fed, dressed, safe, etc., etc. But they are also the hands used for writing, gardening, typing, sewing, mending, cleaning, etc., etc. And it is from a great frustration with locking joints, triggering fingers, painful, cramping hands that I continue to learn humility. While adoring all 5 grandchildren, Annabelle, aged nearly 4, is particularly attentive and verbally astute. And when tears come to my eyes as I try to put the children's seatbelts on before going to school and preschool, she says, "Nana, just use another finger." And she is right. I too can learn to use another finger rather than the middle finger, which has been the one that's been triggering. Nanas too can learn new ways of doing things with greater humility. Humility allows us to keep our natural purity, our simplicity, like children. And simplicity of heart is itself this purity of soul that allows us to retain our innocence. Humility is the basis of an honest, mature self-awareness that accepts ourselves as we are, without covering up, making excuses, or blaming others. A mature self-knowledge depends on truth and honesty. The theme for this year's Mental Health October month is Learn and Grow. According to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual with their own potential can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and is able to make a contribution in their community. We are being encouraged in this month to learn more about mental health and use that knowledge to grow personally and take control of our own mental well-being. The statistics tell us that nearly half of all Australians will experience some form of mental distress and illness during their lifetime, and those that don't will most likely know someone who does. But there's still a lot of stigma and confusion around the topic, and that's where learning and growing comes in. This theme encourages us all to learn new and exciting things, as the very act of learning, especially for me and others with ageing brain cells, can have many positive outcomes on our mental health and well-being, no matter what we choose to learn about. Our readings today, Sirach, the Psalm and Luke, all help us to learn and grow with humility. The book of Sirach, also known as Ecclesiasticus, was penned about 180 BC in Jerusalem. The book acted as a text for young wealthy students, instructing them in the ways of wisdom. Sirach revealed the status of the Jewish capital under Syrian domination. Society was polarised, rich versus poor, Jew versus Gentile, the powerful versus the weak. Sirach's proverbs and general advice sought to guide the reader's conduct through tenuous times. One of the areas where public behaviour and private conduct merged was temple worship. Many competing agendas of oppression, showy rituals or personal aggrandizements. Sirach tried to help the reader look at worship through the eyes of God. A humble heart. For humility allows one to treat others the way God treats them, without partiality. No bribe or show of piety can replace a humble heart. God hears the prayer of the humble, those who place God first in their life. There is always an answer from God, even if it takes time. Worship means we place ourselves fully before God, not to brag or manipulate, but simply to be with God. I do delight in being in this sanctuary by myself. I find it a very sacred and holding space. From time to time, I find myself sitting in a pew and praising God, singing and saying prayers. But I also like witnessing the humility with which those who have responsibility in preparation for our Sunday service arrive early in this place to clean up the flowers, arrange the new ones in a carefully selected vase. Others practice singing, warming up the organ, opening doors, arranging the worship objects on the centre table, preparing the morning tea. The list goes on. The gathering in of ourselves, our lives, with what helps us to worship on a Sunday morning in this sacred space. And in fact, John Floyd acknowledged in the E-News this week the warmth, health and success of a volunteer community organisation is dependent on the willingness and commitment of all its volunteers. I know I'm paraphrasing your words, but I do endorse them. Psalm 65, a song of thanksgiving for earth's bounty, can be divided into 3 sections. God is forgiver, showing mercy and kindness. Deliverer, God's graciousness on behalf of all creation, and provider, the community's relationship to God. The psalmist describes the movement of spirit, giving a dutiful response to God for particular blessings, moving through awe at God's majesty, and culminating in the joyous praise we experience in community. The American poet, Mary Oliver, we all seem to be quoting Mary Oliver, Varanasi, from her book, 2012 book, 1,000 Mornings, is such a visual description of the humility, simplicity and devotion of the Indian people at the ceremony of light, the Arati, that Jane and I experienced on our trip to India last year. And this is Mary Oliver's words. Early in the morning we crossed the Ghat, where fires are still smouldering, and gazed with our Western minds into the Ganges. A woman standing in the river up to her waist. She was lifting handfuls of water and spilling it over her body, slowly and many times, as if until there came some moment of inner satisfaction between her own life and the river's. Then she dipped a vessel she had brought with her and carried it filled with water back across the Ghat, no doubt to refresh some shrine near where she lives. For this is the holy city of Shiva, maker of the world, and this is his river. I can't say much more except that it all happened in silence and blissful, peaceful simplicity, and something that felt like the bliss of a certainty of a life lived in accordance with that certainty. I must remember this, I thought, as we fly back to America. Pray God I remember this. As many of you know, I do find spiritual nourishment in walking at dawn, seeing the sunrise, feeling the expansiveness of the early light. And Jane and I walked this morning looking at sculptures by the sea, so I would encourage you all to go and have a look down there at Bondi and round to Tamarama. Jane and I had gone to the evening service on the Ganges with the priests, swaying the lanterns and chanting their devotion to the Hindu deity, Mother Ganga. And we returned in the early morning to also witness not only the devotion, the early morning activities of bathing and purifying the local people in the Ganges, but also those who had made their spiritual pilgrimage to Varanasi. The sacredness of their devotion was humbling, and it stays with us. Moving on to today's Gospel reading. Who are you, a Pharisee or a tax collector? It is hard to read this parable without placing oneself in one role or the other, or like me, hearing yourself in both people. Which of us has not felt a bit self-satisfied on a Sunday morning thinking, oh God, I thank that I'm not like those other people, my next door neighbours enjoying a round of golf now instead of coming to worship, my friend in the other political party who does not understand God's will for our nation, or even that scruffy taxi driver sitting some pews over. I'm here every Sunday morning and Wednesday evening. I give faithfully and I serve on 3 important church committees. The end of the thought bubble. For some of us, it is only when we mess up in a big way that we gain the humility of the tax collector. Those in recovery programs for drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling, to name a few, call it hitting rock bottom. Major mistakes or griefs are sometimes what brings us to see our need for God's grace and forgiveness and come to know the healing nature of humility. I am reminded that there is a service at 3 o'clock this afternoon with the Blue Knot organisation in support of the 1 in 4 estimated 5 million Australian adult survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. I'd encourage you, after coming to the 3 o'clock service here, you are also very welcome to join the celebratory 25-year anniversary of the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Choir over at Paddington Town Hall at 5:30. When my son Tom took his life in March 2012, I was still the State Manager of the School Counselling Psychological Services of the Department of Education. I had risen through merit selection over many years to be top of the bureaucracy in my area of expertise, psychology and education. I had administrative and professional practice responsibilities for a staff of over 900 full-time school counselling positions in the state of New South Wales. I had authored many articles on serious incident management, including suicide prevention for children and adolescents till they left school at 18 or 19. Tom was 26, living at home with his dad and his mates, working as a youth pastor in a Pentecostal church. No known history of suicidal behaviours or thoughts, drug addiction, etc., etc. Besides the longing, the missing Tom, the walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I've spent many hours, as does his dad and his 2 beautiful sisters, and I'm sure many of you who have lost a loved one to suicide have also, looking for an explanation or numbers of explanations. In my professional psychological readings, in studies on risk-taking personalities, in supervision, support or lack of for youth workers in Pentecostal churches, in concussion studies, talking to research professionals, the long-term effects of sustained concussion incidents, and in our relationship with Tom over his lifetime. The process of not knowing is incredibly humbling. Very often brings me to my knees and finds me weeping. On a day-to-day basis, I do thank Tom for the wonderful 26 years we had. All the fun, the antics, the sport, the arguments, the discussions, his unconditional love. I just wish the ride with Tom here was for longer, and I live with the mystery. It is the only way I have any peace. But like the slogan for Mental Health Month, I will always be learning and growing in my understandings of Tom and of suicide. The current Man Up series on the ABC has provided some insights into emotional intelligence and the difficulties men in general have in communicating their feelings and seeking help. As a commentator said of his friend, if he could do it, suicide, anyone can. What we also say about Tom. Some very useful initiatives have been set up in some industries, such as with the construction workers, not previously known for being a caring, sharing profession, where the statistics for accidental death and suicide are amongst our nation's highest. Important conversations are being had, and this helps take away the shame and the stigma. In my retirement, I've taken to working a couple of days a week casually as a school counsellor in Shoalhaven High School, and it's wonderful to be back in the field assisting students, their families and teachers with positive mental health programs. I have always enjoyed field work. I didn't go up the bureaucratic greasy pole to get away from face-to-face work, but to implement systemic change. In fact, it keeps me in touch with current pressures on young people and translating psychological research into practical ways to build resilience in the community. On a day-to-day basis, many of the boys I see, it is their behaviour, often violent, attention-seeking, that gives me an insight into what is going on in their families. The grief that they feel about their poor relationships with men and their dads in particular. Together with some school staff, I'm running a Seasons for Growth course, not dissimilar to the adolescent high school program on Man Up on last Tuesday evening, with a number of students this term who have who experienced loss of a significant other in recent years, in which we will help them to develop their resilience and capacities to cope. This parable in Luke today tells us about ourselves as followers of Jesus. If it makes us twinge with remorse at the thought of acting like a self-righteous Pharisee, it also inspires us with the humility of the tax collector. Jesus challenges us to avoid trusting in our own efforts at loving, but rather to humble ourselves before a merciful and loving God. Notice that the followers also leave their regrets. This is affirming, since the humility of the tax collector does not require wallowing in self-loathing. The liberation of knowing that God is merciful and loving means that we can leave behind our reliance on our achievements in work or in our faith community. On its face, it seems like a simple story that encourages humility and condemns spiritual pride. How does one reflect on humility without succumbing to spiritual pride? Surely this is one of the greatest spiritual paradoxes. Be humble. As soon as we've arrived at a suitable state of humility, we are tempted to take pride in our accomplishment. As the Sufi teacher Hazrat Inayat Khan puts it, we understand humility by purifying our egos, our personalities, with gentleness, self-control, tolerance, and by forgiveness. In the mental plane, the desire to be proud, the desire to be vain, to show conceit, to show superiority over others, all comes from the ego. We are encouraged to be wise by learning humility, that the ego gives a false idea of greatness, but through the effacement of our ego, we can have true greatness. Humility is a principal thing that needs to be learnt in training the ego and personality, so that with every thought and action, our hearts are filled with divine light and love. We see this humility with the Buddhist leader, the Dalai Lama. Towards the end of Magda Zabansky's memoir released earlier this year entitled Reckoning, she is trying to work out the morality of her father's actions in Poland during World War II, working out how to frame a question to the Dalai Lama, what the reckoning will be for her dad, now that he is dead, for the crime against humanity committed by her father. Quote. But instead, she asks, what is the most important thing to be teaching our children? And the Dalai Lama replies, kindness. Always kindness. This is quite poignant, as the reader realises, like Magda, that her father, amongst many other heart qualities, was indeed a man of kindness, despite what he had had to do. The story of the giving tree, which I didn't get to read, but most of you have probably read this book over the years. It's a story about a tree, and she gives shade and light in the early part of the book. And then as she gets older, the little boy wants to make a boat and takes bark. And then as the tree gets older, gets chopped down to build a house. And then towards the end of the book, it's just a stump in the ground. She's just a stump, but she's still giving somewhere to sit. A bit like all of us too, what we do through our lives, being a giving tree. So it's a beautiful metaphor for all of us in humility, kindness and life, us being the trees, having meaning at every stage, learning and growing. Indeed, if you are like me and you're into trees, lying on the ground and looking through the tracery of the branches and the spaces between the branches, it opens up our mind and heart. And I love the image that's on our cover of the liturgy today. It's a terrific one for reflecting on. Or you like rolling round in the autumn leaves. I've been known to tell people to stop the car, even at my grand age of over 60, and get out and roll around in the leaves. Most embarrassing to the kids, they always tell me. But you know, sometimes you've got to smell them to enjoy them as well as the colours and what you see. So the ABC radio program this Mental Health Month is encouraging us to boost our well-being through learning a new skill, doing more exercise, looking up into the trees, appreciating their trunks, the bark, their shade, being kinder to others and to ourselves. So celebrate, sing your song, dance your dance, and take time in each present moment to offer sincere thoughts of reverence, awe and gratefulness. Be grateful for whoever and whatever comes through the windows of your life. Before you ask God for what you want, first thank God for what you have. If you truly want to be an instrument of love, kindness and peace, then take time each day to welcome God into your life and give thanks. Amen.